There was a time when I believed Ashbury was the kind of place where nothing truly bad could happen. A town stitched together with maple trees, gentle hills, and porch lights that always seemed to glow a little longer in the evening, as if the houses themselves were waiting for someone to come home. Everything felt still, protected, and somehow sacred in its simplicity. Our house sat quietly on a tree-lined street, modest but full of warmth. Its creaky floorboards and slightly chipped windows weren't flaws, they were memories. I never questioned the rhythm of our days. I woke to the sound of birds singing in the garden and the scent of maple syrup rising from the kitchen. My mother, Clara, was always there, her voice a gentle hum blending into the soft clatter of pans. She made even ordinary mornings feel like celebrations. She sang as she cooked, swayed slightly as she moved. Her laugh, light, warm, unguarded, would float down the hallway and wrap around me like a blanket. She was sunshine in motion, and she made loving look effortless. My father, James, was the quieter of the two. Not distant, just deeply steady, like the trees that lined our neighborhood, strong, silent, constant. He never raised his voice, never missed a school concert, or forgot to check the oil in my car. His way of loving was quiet, practical, dependable. Where my mother gave warmth, he gave safety. And somehow, between the two of them, they created a world for me that felt untouched by sadness. I didn't realize it then, of course. When you grow up inside something beautiful, you assume it's the way life simply is. I thought everyone had Sunday pancakes, evening walks, a father who fixed things without being asked, and a mother whose hugs lingered even after she let go. Looking back now, I understand it wasn't perfection I lived in, but illusion. A delicate, lovely illusion built from kindness, routine, and love that seemed endless. I see now that even the most beautiful moments are still fleeting, and peace, no matter how real it feels in the moment, can vanish without warning. But back then, I believed we were untouchable. It happened so quickly that even now, years later, I struggle to recall the exact sequence of days. One moment, my mother was standing at the kitchen counter, smiling at me through wisps of steam rising from a pot of tea. The next, I was sitting beside her hospital bed, her fingers slack in mine, her voice already fading into the kind of silence that doesn't end. She hadn't been sick long, just long enough to teach me how fragile a person can be. Long enough to steal all the light from the house. When she died, something inside our home broke, not with noise, not with a dramatic crash, but with the slow, muffled collapse of everything we had taken for granted. The laughter that once spilled from the kitchen dried up. The humming disappeared. And though her scent lingered for weeks in her pillowcases and favorite scarf, eventually even that was gone. I remember the first morning after the funeral. I came downstairs and stood barefoot on the cool tiles of the kitchen, waiting for a song that never came, for the familiar clang of a spatula on a pan, for someone to look at me and say, "Good morning, darling." But the room was quiet, and my father was already gone. He had left for work before dawn, retreating into the one thing he still seemed to understand: function, purpose, duty. Grief didn't make him cruel. It just made him unreachable. He didn't know how to talk about her. Or maybe he did, and simply couldn't bear to. Instead, we started talking like neighbors instead of kin. We discussed groceries, homework, gas bills, but we never mentioned her name. And as the weeks passed, I learned something nobody had warned me about. Grief is not just sorrow, it is distance. It's the space that grows between people who don't know how to mourn together. And within that space, I was completely and utterly alone. I'd sit at the dining table in the evenings, staring at the empty chair where my mother used to sit. Her place was always closest to the window, where the afternoon light pooled around her like it had chosen her over the rest of us. Now the light still came, but it felt indifferent. And I watched my father from across the table, his face more lined, more tired. He tried, in his way, but his presence wasn't enough to anchor me anymore. We were two people drifting on the same sea, each in our own lifeboat, waving at each other from too far away. I wanted to cry. I wanted to scream. But mostly I wanted her to walk in, brush the hair from my face, and remind me I was still loved. I longed for her voice, for her laugh, for the soft pressure of her hand on my back as she passed behind me. But there was only silence. A silence so vast it echoed, and it was in that silence that I began to vanish too. Grief doesn't leave, it only settles, like dust. You stop noticing it, even as it coats everything you touch. 3 years passed. The world didn't stop turning, even when mine had. I graduated from high school, packed away most of my mother's belongings into boxes I couldn't bear to open, and tried to make peace with the quiet rhythm my father and I had developed. Two people passing in hallways, sharing meals without conversation, living more beside each other than with each other. Then came Evelyn. She arrived softly, like spring after a long, gray winter. Not with fanfare or fireworks, but with quiet gestures, homemade muffins left on the counter, soft throws folded over the couch, the gentle way she addressed my father by his name with care in her voice. She didn't try to take up space. She made room. And yet, her very presence felt like an intrusion. When my father told me he was remarrying, he looked at me as though bracing for a storm. "You don't have to be happy about it," he said, "but I hope you'll try to understand." I nodded because I didn't know what else to do. A part of me wanted him to be happy. He deserved warmth again, too. But another part, a wounded and territorial part, felt betrayed. As though letting someone else into our home meant erasing everything we had lost. Evelyn moved in one rainy afternoon in late September. Along with her came her son, Noah. He was just a year younger than me. Tall, lean, with dark, unkempt hair and an expression that kept most people at arm's length. He didn't say much when we met. Just a quiet "hey" and a quick glance before looking away. Evelyn introduced him with the same hopeful smile a mother uses when she wants her child to be liked. "This is Noah," she said. "He's excited to be here." He didn't look excited. And truthfully, neither was I. Our house, my house, no longer felt like home. The familiar creaks in the floorboards weren't just mine anymore. The kitchen that had once smelled of cinnamon and vanilla now bore hints of rosemary, unfamiliar perfumes, and someone else's favorite cereal. The change wasn't loud or aggressive. It was slow. I woke one morning and realized I hadn't used my favorite coffee mug in weeks because Evelyn had gently rearranged the cupboards. It was the smallest things that hurt the most. Noah and I coexisted like reluctant passengers on a train headed nowhere in particular. At meals, We sat across from each other in stiff silence. Our parents made polite conversation about Evelyn's new job, my father's garden, errands, the weather. Noah and I exchanged occasional glances, rarely words. But even then, in the quiet, something began to stir. Something unspoken. It wasn't attraction, not exactly. More like recognition. Like two people who had each lost something and could see the same echo of emptiness reflected in the other. I noticed the way his shoulders tensed when someone mentioned his father, the way his eyes lingered too long on family photographs that didn't include him. I didn't want to feel anything for him. But grief has strange gravity. It pulls kindred spirits closer, even when they try to keep their distance. And so, in the quiet corners of our new, two-blended home, the stage was slowly, unknowingly being set for what would come next. Change rarely announces itself with thunder. Sometimes it slips through unnoticed, an extra breath between sentences, a glance held a beat too long, a silence that feels different than all the others. At first, Noah was simply there, a quiet presence in the background of my days. He moved through the house like a ghost that hadn't decided whether to stay or leave. We rarely spoke, save for the occasional "pass the salt" or "did you see my charger?" His bedroom door remained mostly closed, and so did mine. There was a politeness between us, careful and cold. But underneath, something fragile had begun to shift. It started with the smallest of gestures. One evening at dinner, I reached for the last slice of garlic bread, just as he did. Our fingers brushed, just for a second, and we both froze. He quickly pulled his hand back, murmuring, "Sorry." I gave a tight smile and said, "You take it." He shook his head. "It's okay. You go ahead." I didn't think much of it at the time. But later that night, lying in bed, I realized I could still feel where his fingers had touched mine. After that, I began to notice him more. The way he ran a hand through his hair when he was frustrated. How he'd sometimes stand by the window for no reason at all, staring out like he was trying to remember something he'd forgotten. He had a habit of tapping his fingers against the table when he was thinking. I told myself I was just observant. That was all. But deep down, I knew I was watching him differently. Not like a sibling. Not like a stranger. But like someone trying to understand a puzzle they had no business solving. He noticed things too. One evening, I had come home late after walking around the lake near our house. I didn't realize the wind had tousled my hair or that my sweater was on backward until I saw him standing by the stairs. "You okay?" he asked, his voice low. I nodded. Just needed some air. He didn't press. Just nodded back, like he understood exactly what I meant. We didn't talk about the ache we both carried, the missing fathers, the silent houses, the shadows of people we once loved. But in our silence, there was recognition. A shared loneliness. The kind that doesn't ask for permission before it starts to grow. Soon, the awkward glances turned into something else. He started saving a seat for me when we watched TV with our parents. Picking up snacks I liked. Leaving the hallway light on when I forgot. None of it was spoken, but each gesture settled into my chest like something both comforting and dangerous. And then there were the moments when I caught him watching me. Once, I was sitting on the couch reading, my legs tucked beneath me, lost in the pages of a novel. When I looked up, he was standing at the entrance of the room, his gaze fixed on me. not in a way that was threatening. Just still, like he didn't realize he'd been staring. When our eyes met, he blinked, looked down, and walked away. But my heart kept racing long after he'd left. Something had changed between us. Something neither of us could name. And it terrified me, because it wasn't just tension, it was temptation. The kind you try to ignore, but always feel like standing too close to the edge of a cliff. There was no reason to feel what I was feeling. No justification. No sense. But feelings don't ask for permission. They arrive, settle in, and dare you to look away. And I wasn't looking away anymore. It began without warning. Like a breeze slipping through a half-closed window, it was there, uninvited but undeniable. The first night he came to my room, I thought it was a mistake. I had been lying in bed, the lamp casting warm pools of gold onto the walls, trying to read the same paragraph over and over. Outside, the wind moved through the trees like a hush. The house was quiet, so quiet that the sound of footsteps in the hallway felt louder than they should have been. I assumed it was my father. Or Evelyn, maybe. But then the door creaked slightly, not fully opening, just enough to let in the dim hallway light. And then I heard his voice. "Can I come in?" Noah's voice was soft, uncertain, like even he wasn't sure why he was asking. I hesitated, just long enough to feel the flutter in my chest, then nodded. He stepped inside, closing the door gently behind him. The room felt smaller somehow, as if the walls had moved inward. He didn't say much, just sat on the edge of the bed, a careful distance away, his posture unsure. At first, we talked about nothing. School assignments, how weird Evelyn's new recipe had been at dinner, whether or not he'd pass his driving test. But there was something beneath the surface. Something alive and restless in the silences. He didn't stay long. Maybe 10 minutes. But when he left, the space he had filled lingered, like the warmth a person leaves on a pillow after they've gone. I lay there staring at the ceiling, pretending it meant nothing. But the next night, he came again. And the night after that. Each time, we spoke a little less. Sometimes we just sat together, the silence between us comfortable and unbearable all at once. I started to notice the way his voice dipped into something lower when he was tired. How his eyes softened when he talked about childhood memories, especially the ones that held his mother's laughter. He didn't share much about the pain, but the spaces where his words trailed off spoke louder than anything else could. I didn't know why I let him in. I didn't even know what it was we were doing, what we were becoming. But there was a strange kind of solace in his presence. The way he leaned back on his hands while he talked. The way he looked at me when he thought I wasn't looking. And yet, even then, I could feel something shifting in me. There was one night later than the others when he lingered longer. We weren't talking anymore, just sitting in silence. He turned toward me, and I felt the air shift again. His gaze met mine, steady and unreadable. "Why do you keep coming here?" I whispered, my voice barely holding itself together. Noah looked down, his thumb tracing circles on the edge of the blanket. "I don't know," he said. "I guess, because when I'm here, I don't feel like I'm pretending." Something cracked in me then. Not in a loud, breaking sort of way, but softly. Like a quiet surrender. I didn't answer. I just let the silence return. Let it say the things I didn't know how to. When he finally stood up and left the room, I realized I'd been holding my breath. That night, I didn't sleep, because somewhere in the quiet, in the half-light of our shared grief, I had begun to feel something I shouldn't. And I knew no matter how careful we were, no matter how many lines we drew in the dark, we were already standing on a thread that could snap at any moment. The house felt different without them. My father and Evelyn had left for a weekend trip to visit her sister in another town, a quiet, practical getaway that was supposed to feel uneventful. They packed light, left early Saturday morning, and waved from the car with cheerful smiles. It was the first time they'd left the two of us alone. At first, it felt harmless. I spent the morning cleaning, rearranging books I hadn't touched in months. Noah mostly stayed in his room, headphones on, lost in music I could faintly hear beneath his closed door. We passed each other in the hallway once or twice, each offering a polite, distant hey. It felt manageable, safe, even. But by evening, the quiet had changed. The silence no longer felt peaceful. It felt expectant, like the house itself was waiting for something to happen. A thought crept into my mind, subtle and persistent. This is the kind of quiet where lines blur. I made popcorn, put on a movie. Something light, a romantic comedy with predictable endings and characters who fell in love too easily. I told myself it would be nothing. Just two people in the same house, sharing space like almost siblings do. Noah came downstairs a little later than expected. He didn't ask what we were watching. He just sat on the far end of the couch, a respectful distance. I offered the popcorn, and he took some, murmuring a soft thanks. We didn't look at each other much at first. We laughed at the corny jokes, commented on the bad acting. And for a while, it was exactly what I had wanted, ordinary. But then, somewhere halfway through, the film changed tone. A love scene. Not vulgar or loud, just slow, tender, and far too honest. And everything shifted. I felt it immediately, the tension crawling quietly into the room, curling around us. It was in the way the laughter stopped, the way the air thickened, the way we both suddenly couldn't quite meet each other's eyes. I told myself to focus on the screen, to breathe normally, to pretend the couch beneath me hadn't suddenly become too warm. I could feel him beside me, not close, but present. And in that moment, presence was enough to unravel everything. I stood up quickly, brushing imaginary crumbs from my lap. I should probably go to bed, I said, avoiding his gaze as I picked up the empty popcorn bowl. But as I turned to leave, his voice, barely above a whisper, caught me. Wait, I paused. It wasn't the word that stopped me. It was the way he said it, gentle, hesitant, but certain. Like a thread being pulled, soft and slow. I turned, and he was looking at me, not with expectation, not even with desire, just something that made it suddenly hard to breathe. I forced a smile. Good night, Noah. He didn't answer. And as I climbed the stairs, I felt the shift settle into my bones. The silence that followed was no longer neutral. It carried weight now. It hummed with the memory of something that hadn't happened, but nearly had. I lay in bed that night, eyes wide open, listening to the wind brushing against the windows, the quiet tick of the hallway clock, the sound of my own heartbeat. I kept thinking of the way he had looked at me, not like a sister, not even like a friend, like someone standing on the edge of something they weren't sure they could walk away from. And though we had said nothing, had done nothing, I knew with terrifying clarity that a line had been crossed. Not with our bodies, but with our hearts. Sleep didn't come easily that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw his face in the doorway, heard the way his voice had folded around a single word, wait. The sound of it stayed with me long after the movie ended, long after I'd climbed the stairs, long after I'd told myself to forget it. But I didn't forget. I lay beneath my blanket, wide awake, staring at the ceiling. The silence of the house pressed against me like a second skin. The ticking of the hallway clock marked each passing moment, steady and patient, as though it, too, were waiting for something. Then I heard them, footsteps, soft, slow, familiar. I knew them before he even reached the door. Noah didn't knock this time. The door creaked open an inch, and his voice came low, uncertain, Ophelia. I sat up slowly, pulling the blanket to my chest. Come in. He entered the room like someone stepping into a memory they weren't sure belonged to them. The light from the hallway spilled around his shoulders, outlining him in a quiet kind of vulnerability. He looked tired. Not physically, but like someone who had been holding too many things in for too long. I couldn't sleep, he said. I nodded, though I didn't trust myself to speak. He walked over and sat at the edge of the bed, not too close, not too far. Just there. We didn't say anything for a while. The silence between us didn't ask for words, it was full enough on its own. He looked over at me, his eyes unreadable but open. I keep thinking about that moment downstairs, he whispered. Not because of the movie, but because of how you looked at me. Like you knew. I swallowed hard. I don't know what you mean, but I did. His gaze didn't waver. I can't stop thinking about you. My breath caught. My heart beat louder than the silence in the room. I know it's wrong, he continued, his voice cracking around the edges. I know I shouldn't feel this way, but I do. And I don't know how to stop. He reached for my hand, not forcefully, not desperately, just gently. His fingers brushed against mine like a question waiting to be answered. I should have pulled away. I should have said something, anything, to break the moment. To stop what was unfolding between us like a page we couldn't unwrite. But I didn't. Instead, I let the silence stretch. Let it fill the room with things neither of us could say out loud. I looked at him, and I didn't see my stepbrother. I didn't see labels or expectations. I saw someone who understood my grief, who had walked through the same silence, who had also stood at the edge of losing something he loved. And in that moment, connection felt like a lifeline. He leaned in, slowly, watching me the entire time, giving me the chance to say no. But I didn't. Our lips met, soft and uncertain at first, like both of us were waiting to wake from a dream we hadn't meant to have. But when I didn't pull away, something in him gave way. And in that moment, we stopped pretending. There were no fireworks, no music, just skin against skin, heart against heart, breath against breath. And when it was over, when the quiet returned and we lay side by side in the stillness, I knew something irreversible had happened. I didn't feel guilt. Not right away. Just a strange, quiet peace, as though for the first time in a long time, the ache in my chest had eased. But even in that stillness, something inside me whispered, "This will cost you." And I wasn't wrong, because that night, we didn't just cross a line. We erased it. Morning came quietly, with golden light seeping through the curtains like it didn't know what had happened. The room was still. too still. For a moment, I forgot. The sheets were warm, the sunlight soft, and the air smelled faintly of popcorn and lavender. But then I turned my head and he was still there. Noah, asleep beside me, his hair messy, lips parted slightly, breath slow and steady. And just like that, reality returned. It didn't come crashing in. It came like cold water poured down the spine, a slow, spreading awareness that something had shifted in a way that couldn't be undone. I watched him for a long time, trying to gather the courage to move, to breathe normally, to be the version of myself from just a day before. But she was gone. The girl who sat on the couch with her stepbrother and laughed at romantic comedies had vanished into the folds of the night. Noah stirred, eyes blinking open. He looked at me, and I expected awkwardness, regret, something, but there was none, just quiet recognition. And maybe something else, something like resolve. I don't regret it, he said softly, voice still thick with sleep. I need you to know that. I couldn't speak. My throat was tight, and my chest ached in a way I hadn't anticipated. All I could do was nod, blinking back tears I didn't fully understand. We got dressed without speaking. The house around us was still, but inside me, everything was rushing. Guilt, fear, shame. But underneath all of that confusing and terrible was something tender. A warmth I didn't want to name. That day, we moved through the house like nothing had happened. We made breakfast, talked about weather and grocery lists, avoided looking too long. But every glance we did share felt electric, like we were carrying a secret too big for the walls around us. And it was a secret, a dangerous, delicate one. When my father and Evelyn returned, everything shifted again, but this time into performance. We smiled. We helped unpack. We asked about the trip. And the entire time, I could feel Noah's presence in the room, not beside me, not even behind me, but in me. As if I could feel his thoughts brushing up against mine. That night at dinner, Evelyn asked Noah about college applications, and my father asked if I needed new boots before winter. We answered like nothing was wrong, and yet, under the table, I kept my legs pulled tight against the chair. I couldn't bear the idea of brushing against him by accident. I told myself I had to forget. That it was just one night. A moment of weakness, but forgetting wasn't simple. Not when my body still remembered the way he looked at me in the dark. The way his voice had trembled when he said my name. Not when my heart had leapt every time he brushed past me in the hallway. I wanted to be good. I wanted to rewind time. But I also wanted that feeling again, that sense of being seen, truly seen, for the first time in what felt like years. Each night, I lay in bed, hoping he wouldn't knock on my door, and fearing that he would. I began to carry the weight of what we had done in every small moment. In the way I hesitated when Evelyn hugged me. In the way I avoided my father's eyes. In the way I flinched when Noah's hand brushed mine while reaching for a dish. We didn't talk about it. Not out loud. But the silence was full of it, echoing in every corner of the house. We were actors on a fragile stage, and at any moment, the truth could crack the floor beneath us. Some truths don't scream. They wait, quiet, patient, growing heavier each day until the silence around them begins to crack. Weeks passed. On the surface, everything held together. We laughed when expected, answered questions with practiced ease, and folded laundry like people with nothing to hide. But beneath it all, I was unraveling thread by thread. Noah and I became experts in pretending. Our conversations were short, measured. We moved through the house like two actors stuck in a scene that never ended. But even in our restraint, there were moments, tiny charged, where everything threatened to spill out again. A glance that lingered too long. A shared silence in the hallway. The faint brush of hands when passing a plate at dinner. No one noticed. But I did, and it was killing me. I began to dread the nights. That was when the house grew too quiet, when memories grew too loud. I'd lie in bed, eyes open, haunted by everything we hadn't said. My chest ached with a strange kind of grief, not for the past, but for the innocence I could never return to. Then one night, as if pulled by something neither of us could name, he came again. A soft knock, a whisper of my name. The familiar outline of him standing in my doorway, lit by the hallway glow. I didn't answer right away. I didn't know if I could, but he opened the door anyway. He stepped inside with hesitation, like he already knew he shouldn't be there. His eyes searched mine, and for a moment, we just stood there in silence, two people holding a secret between them like something fragile and flammable. "I can't stop thinking about you," he said, voice rough, almost breaking. "I know it's wrong, Ophelia, but I can't help it." I sat up slowly, my heart thudding in my chest. "Noah," my voice cracked, "we can't keep doing this. It's not right." He stepped closer. "I know, but it doesn't change how I feel." Tears rose in my eyes. I hated him for saying it. I hated myself for wanting to hear it. He sat beside me on the bed, his presence too familiar, too dangerous. Our fingers brushed, and every cell in my body screamed to run, but I didn't move. We didn't kiss. We didn't cross that line again. But we didn't walk away either. Instead, we sat in the darkness, not touching but not separate, suspended in something we couldn't name. A quiet, tangled ache. I knew then that this couldn't continue, that the longer we waited, the more it would destroy. But knowing and doing are not the same. The next morning, I stood at the kitchen sink while Evelyn talked about her garden and Dad read the news aloud. I nodded at the right moments, smiled when expected, but I could feel him watching me from the other side of the room, his reflection caught in the window beside mine. I could barely breathe. That night, I slipped out onto the back porch. The stars were scattered above me, cold and unbothered by anything that happened here on Earth. I folded my arms across my chest, trying to keep the air in my lungs, trying to remember who I was before all of this. Then I heard footsteps. Noah sat down beside me without a word. For a while, we just listened to the sounds of the night, the whisper of leaves, the hum of a distant car. "I've been thinking," he said at last, "about us, about what we've done." His voice was gentle, but it pressed on something raw inside me. "I don't know how to carry it," I whispered. He looked at me, his eyes filled with pain and longing. "Do you regret it?" I didn't answer right away. I stared up at the stars, then down at my hands. "I regret that it happened this way," I said slowly. "I regret the silence, the hiding, the fear. But I don't regret feeling wanted. I don't regret feeling seen." He reached for my hand, but this time I pulled away. "We have to let this go," I said, more firmly than I felt, "before it ruins everything." Tears welled in his eyes, and for the first time, I saw not the boy I had grown dangerously close to, but the child beneath, the one who just wanted to belong. The one who, like me, had been trying to stitch together something that felt like home. "I don't know if I can," he whispered. "Neither do I admitted. But we have to try." And in that quiet moment beneath the stars, I made a choice. Not out of strength, not out of clarity, but out of the simple, aching truth that love is not always right. That sometimes the most honest thing we can do is walk away, even when everything inside us wants to stay. Letting go doesn't always feel like freedom. Sometimes it feels like standing in front of a door you've already closed, with your hand still resting on the knob. After that night on the porch, we didn't speak of it again. Not the words, not the kiss, not the nights. We buried everything we had been building under layers of quiet, pretending it had never existed. It became something unsaid, but never unfelt. The days returned to their routine. Morning coffee, small talk over cereal, chores, dinners. The occasional shared glance across the table that lingered just a second too long before one of us looked away. On the surface, we had returned to normal, but nothing was truly normal again. Every interaction became choreography, measured, restrained. I wore my silence like armor, and so did he. We moved carefully, afraid of stirring the ashes of what we had set fire to, and at night, I lay awake with the weight of all the words I never said. "I miss you. I still feel it. I wish we'd met in another life," but I never said them, because I had made a choice. And sometimes, doing the right thing feels exactly like breaking your own heart. One evening, a few weeks later, I found him in the garage, sorting through old boxes. I stood in the doorway, watching him quietly, unnoticed for a moment. He was dusting off an old photo frame, my mother's. He looked at her picture the way I often did, with a reverence and ache that only someone who's lost deeply could understand. When he finally noticed me, he didn't flinch. He just gave a soft smile, one full of sorrow, but also of peace. "Your mom was beautiful," he said. "She would have been proud of you." I swallowed hard, nodded. "Thanks." It wasn't a moment of reunion. It wasn't the beginning of anything. It was closure, a quiet understanding that we would carry this story with us, but never live inside it again. Time did what it always does, it moved forward. Eventually, I left for college. Noah stayed back for a while, and we drifted into the soft, inevitable distance that life puts between people who once meant more than they ever admitted aloud. Sometimes I still think of him. When autumn comes and the wind smells like fading leaves and unsaid goodbyes. When I pass by houses with warm lights in the windows and wonder what it would have been like if we'd met in a life that allowed it. But most of all, I think of him in silence. Because some stories aren't meant to be told out loud. Some love exists only to remind us what we're capable of feeling. Even when we must choose not to follow it, letting go doesn't mean forgetting. It means loving someone enough to walk away before the beauty becomes the ruin. And I did love him, just not in the way the world would ever understand.